In this devotional, I'm going to share with you three thoughts from Numbers 25, verses 6 through 9, where I'll answer the question, did Phinehas commit a public murder? Numbers 25, verses 6 through 9 says, "And behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, while they were weeping in the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the chamber and pierced both of them, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly. Thus the plague on the people of Israel was stopped. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. If you just read this paragraph, then it sure does seem like Phinehas is murdering these two people. It seems that way, but if you read the paragraph before and the paragraph after, what you're going to find out pretty quickly is that this action, while particularly brutal, is not a murder. In fact, it is the just obedience to God's command in the sight of all Israel. And that doesn't seem super normal to the modern reader. The modern reader would be like, hey, why don't you just live and let live? This guy's going off and doing his thing, but that doesn't have anything to do with you. But in the midst of a plague that they were experiencing, and in the midst of judgment that God had told the people, the leaders, to execute, it turns out that this action by Phinehas is a sacrificial act that ends up saving innumerable Israelites. So with this in mind, here are three thoughts from Numbers chapter 25, verses 6 through 9, answering the question, did Phinehas commit a public murder? Thought number one, commanded judgment. This is the situation. At the beginning of the chapter, the people of Israel are taking Midianite wives. And they're not just taking Midianite wives. What they're doing is they're embracing the culture and worshiping the gods of these people. And it's because they are whoring after these gods and whoring after these women that God issues the command that the leaders of the people of Israel are to go and they are to kill all of those who had brought these outsiders into their lives. All of these people who weren't satisfied with the women of Israel, but they wanted Midianite wives, they were to be put to death. This is the judgment that the Lord commands the people. And as a part of that judgment, Phinehas is not committing a murder, but he's doing capital punishment. Thought number two, concurrent plague. Another thing that you might miss if you're just reading this paragraph is that there is a plague that is taking place because of the rebellion of Israel in worshiping these false gods and taking women from this nation as their wives. The Lord is punishing them. The people of Israel are to be separate. They're to be different from the nations around them. They are not to participate in their culture. They're not to interwed with these other nations. This is something that the Lord has commanded them, that they are to be distinct, that they are to be separate, and that they are not to syncretically adopt the actions or religions of these other people. But that's what the people were doing anyway. And the Lord's judgment upon them, in addition to the command that anyone who has one of these wives from the other nation need to be killed, a plague breaks out, a plague that kills 24,000 people. And it's in the midst of this plague that the people are gathered together and they're weeping. They're mourning, they're grieving all of these people who are dying because they did not follow the law of God. Thought number three, sacrificial action. What we discover when we read the next paragraph is that the actions of Phinehas are viewed as performing a sacrifice on behalf of the people of Israel. And essentially what's going on is Phinehas's zeal for the Lord, because he is passionate about what God has said. He's passionate about the commands of God, and he is willing to follow the commands of God, even in public, even when it involves actions that are unpopular, even when it's going to really cause an issue when you're doing your priestly duties later on. Because of all that, this action the killing of this rebellious man and his new wife is seen as sacrificial in nature. These two people die while Phinehas is demonstrating his zeal for the Lord, and the Lord removes the plague. He relents from his anger. And this picture of the plague breaking out and then subsiding is the picture of Moses' interaction that happens when the golden calf is being worshipped. So even on a first reading, when it might feel like, hey, Phinehas just murdered these two people in front of everybody, what it really turns out to be is that Phinehas is doing the difficult task of executing the judgment of the Lord on those who are in open rebellion to him. And it demonstrates that open rebellion against the Lord is something that we need to recognize. We need to take it seriously, and we need to be careful not to commit that same action. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Numbers chapters 25 through 28. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.